the history of the Taiwan Strait, but not as a historian, because I was not trained as a historian. I would say history as a geopolitist can do history. Like, I'm trying to see in history on the long haul, on 400 years of history, how perceptions of Taiwan have been constructed by different actors, especially Chinese actors. Not only China, a general China, which doesn't mean anything precisely, but Chinese actors, how this construction of Taiwan's images and perceptions have been done or made over 400 years, leading to the complexity of the situation of Taiwan today. One of the conclusions is that there have been during 400 years both some parallels that are rising in the longer time, parallels in the way China and different actors have behaved in the Taiwan Strait. Like, the most famous parallel, of course, is between Zheng Keshuang and Zheng Keshuang. But this parallel, everyone knows it. And what is interesting to question this parallel, why those two actors have used Taiwan as a place to recover their forces, rebuild their forces, and then later on try to recover the mainland. What are the differences? And not only what are the common points, is a step further to do research and to show why finally it's very difficult to compare those periods. But then I tried to go even further by wondering, in fact, what could be the interest between crossing history and geopolitics. From a geopolitist's point of view, it's about nurturing with a better historical knowledge the understanding of what is happening now in the Taiwan Strait. And instead of comparing Jiang Jieshi and Zheng Keshuang in the 17th century, I'm comparing what Ma Ying-jeou does with the heir of Zheng Keshuang, his grandson, Zheng Keshuang, who made submission to the Qing in 1683. And then I'm coming back to the third dimension of my research, which is geopolitics, contemporary geopolitics, and the political analysis of Taiwan, the analysis of identity politics in Taiwan, as well as this exploration of history, helps me to recontextualize the way Ma Ying-jeou is trying to reach a breakthrough in the Taiwan-China relations. And it makes me very cautious in making a judgment on what is happening. That is very clearly a situation where Ma Ying-jeou, who identifies strongly with China, who definitely hopes to be a major contributor to the end of this deadlock between the two sides, and who is probably trying to smooth the situation to make possible an eventual unification between China and Taiwan, is not, on the other hand, selling Taiwan right now at any cost, which is one of the discourse we hear. So the denial by the Ma camp that they want to make progress and unification is probably a lie. But saying that he's selling Taiwan away is probably a lie too. There is something in between, which is clearly, as I summarized, his attempt to smooth the situation, to make unification more possible than it is actually now in the future. And that is what may be dangerous in a principle of reality when you compare that China and Taiwan are definitely unequal partners, and that smoothing the way to help China and Taiwan reach a breakthrough is probably, in fact, playing on the side of China, even though the Ma government doesn't want to do that. The fundamental problem between China and Taiwan currently is not only the discrepancy of forces, the imbalance of forces, that China is an irredentist country, which means that China does not want to acknowledge the world as it is, which means has never accepted to acknowledge the sovereignty of the ROC. And in this situation, when one of the partner wants simply the disappearance of the other as a sovereign entity, and the four characters of 中华民国, then it is clear that there is no way to collaborate with them in our long-run advantage. In the short term, perhaps Taiwan can gain a few things. Taiwan has signed a total of 18 agreements from the end of June 2008 until the signing of ECFA in June last year. A total of 18 agreements. I don't think that none of them brings anything useful for Taiwan. Of course they do. But we have to remember that they mostly benefit China and help China to advance in her political agenda of integrating the two economies. Everybody wants in Taiwan, whether green or blue, to have good relations with China. Nobody wants to disappear, at least right away, and become PRC. Then how do you address this China in Renaissance? If you choose to acknowledge Chinese positions or help China smooth the situation to make a possible unification possible in the future, even like thinking of doing so in protecting Taiwan's interest, is that realist? The principle of reality calls you to look at China, how strong it is, but is it realist to think that China can think of Taiwan in terms of Taiwan's interest? This is not possible. This is not realistic. And by helping China advancing its agenda, then you make just the situation evolved simply quicker, and in the process you make Taiwan's allies, and especially the US, become very concerned to the possibility of all the technologies that you sold to Taiwan for so many decades will one day go on the other side of the strait. And then in the end, you make your own ally very unhappy, very ill at ease with what's happening, and perhaps in the end just make this ally considering the idea of abandoning Taiwan, which is an open debate in American academia since this year. If we can discuss the current geopolitics of the Taiwan Strait, what I feel is that, as I said to you, I think that my intro tries to be a kind of in between two extreme positions, but clearly on the side of a China-leaning policy. He's not that kind of deep blue, but has to listen to what they say, and he's trying to be moderate, as I think Li Tenghui and Chen Shui-bian were moderate, but each on their side, green and blue. China's pressure is being internalized in Taiwan's politics. I mean that it has an impact that is concretely input into Taiwan's political discourse. I take a very detailed, concrete example. Last month, on the last day of last month, on May 31st of 2011, Ma Ying-jeou made the opening speech of a international conference on international law. And he made a very important declaration. He said that Taiwan and China are not in a frame of 国与国关系, state-to-state relation. And he said very exactly this. I translate from the Chinese. Under the framework of Taiwan's constitution, we are not in a state-to-state relation. And international law doesn't adapt clearly to this situation. We are in a special relationship. And I would say that technically he's right, because the so-called 国与国关系 has never been introduced formally into the constitution. And by the way, it was one of the pledge of Chen Shui-bian when he was elected in his inauguration speech, not to make it part of the constitution. So technically, Ma Ying-jeou is right. But I would say, symbolically, he's going backward a little bit. I would say that coming back to 20 years ago, he's just going back a little bit from the Zhu interpretation of the state-to-state relation between the two sides. Technically, he's right. Symbolically, he's going a little bit backward, going back to former positions. But most important, politically, that's not very realistic. Because if the state-to-state theory is not in the constitution, that's because of this geopolitical situation in which Taiwan is. The concrete reality is that there are two different states. And by not acknowledging it, it's Ma Ying-jeou is going away from a principle of reality, and this is exactly what China wants. So he's in fact internalizing China's pressure into Taiwan's political discourse about the state of relations across the strait.